men are having an experience of like two extremes. You know, if you're a man that's living in the West, regardless of really your age, you're kind of being told two things about vulnerability. On the one side, it's like you're a beta cuck or a soy boy or a little bitch if you are vulnerable in any way. Don't do that. It'll destroy your life. And on the other side, is the commentary that being vulnerable is the solution to all of your damn problems. And so somewhere in the middle of that shitstorm is the truth, right? There's the truth that there is such a thing as too much vulnerability too soon, to the wrong people. That is true. I think what most men also know is that we take a risk when we are vulnerable. We take a risk when we open up and say, I'm struggling with this thing at work, or I'm struggling with this shit that's happening in my relationship, or I don't know how to handle this situation with my kid, or I'm really battling with something internally, psychologically, with anxiety or depression. I really don't know what to do with that. We take a risk when we expose that part of ourselves, and it's a necessary risk. If you take war or battle as an example, and I don't pretend at all. I've never served, so I don't pretend at all to be, well versed in this compared to some people. But I have worked with Navy SEALs. I have worked with people in the military, and one of the things that any good strategist, military strategist, will tell you is that part of being a great tactician is understanding your weaknesses. Now, that doesn't mean that you expose them to the enemy. You're not like, here's where all the faults are. But it is that you and your team have to understand where your weak points are. And if you don't, you're fucked. You're just really screwed. And because of some of the narratives within our culture, these counter narratives, men, I think, are sort of disoriented. Because on the one hand, a lot of women are telling men, just be more vulnerable, it'll solve all your problems. And some men will get a lot of attention from women with that initial vulnerability, which will, inevitably and eventually sort of wear off. And on the other side, it's like you shouldn't show weaknesses. You shouldn't talk about weaknesses. And what happens for a lot of men is that they then disassociate from their weaknesses. They actually like literally disconnect psychologically from any of their weakness, whether that's anxiety or depression or sadness or some type of psychological pain or their insecurities, especially. And then those insecurities build and mount and literally become the energy that destroys their life, right? There's a great psychologist in America named Francis Weller, and he says your pain has its own intelligence. Your pain has its own intelligence. And so if you as a man aren't willing to come into contact with your own pain, it's an inevitability. It's just a matter of time that those insecurities, those fears, those doubts, that grief that you have tried to sequester away from the world and from the people who love you and the people who really want to know you, it will come to haunt you. That will be the psychological force that starts to pull you down and causes you to, skip the gym and eat the potato chips at 10 o'clock at night and, get into constant fights with your spouse or your partner, push them away, shut down, the list just goes on and on and on. So I have a lot of compassion for men in our modern culture because these counter narratives pressurize our system. And for a lot of guys, they're like, I don't know how to be vulnerable or when to be vulnerable. Or if it's even okay to be vulnerable. Like, am I going to get shot? Am I going to get like shot at emotionally, or am I going to get shut down? Am I going to get dumped? So it's a tricky thing. So I'm just setting out the landscape, and then maybe we can go deeper into that.
Yeah, no, this is really good. I definitely want to kind of pick both of these apart. You mentioned, you're told you're beta cuck, weak man, beta, all these other things. I definitely want to kind of explore your thoughts around some of the red pill culture and whatnot. I think it's very damaging to young men in our world, but then also the vulnerability to women. I was asked recently on a live stream podcast, the work I do is specifically working with men that are struggling with pornography addiction. A lot of times the guys that reach out to me, I may be the first person that they've spoken to about their struggles. And then some of these guys are married. Like, how do I have this conversation? And I'm like, well, you never want to go to your wife with this problem without having any type of solution that you're at least working on. You don't want to say, hey, I just struggle with porn. And like, I don't know what I'm going to do about it. Like, you can be vulnerable, but I think there's got to be some strength behind that says, hey, I've struggled with this in the past, but I found the help that I needed. I'm not asking you to be, the accountability. I'm not asking you to make sure that I'm, not struggling. I just want to keep you involved in the conversation. So I guess maybe in terms of male to female vulnerability, how should a guy kind of initiate that conversation so he's not viewed as weak in the eyes of a woman? Get back to the show in a second, guys, but real quick, I want to tell you about today's sponsor, Magnesium Breakthrough by Biooptimizers. Do you know if you're getting enough magnesium? Because 4 out of 5 Americans aren't. And that's a big problem because magnesium is involved in more than 300 biochemical reactions in your body. Today, I want to talk to you about the most common signs to look for that could indicate you're magnesium deficient. Listen carefully to the end because there's going to be a special offer happening at the end of this that could be exactly what you need. Are you irritable or anxious? Do you struggle with insomnia? Do you experience muscle cramps or twitches? Do you have high blood pressure? Are you sometimes constipated? There are dozens of symptoms of magnesium deficiency, but these are just a few of the most common ones. Now, here's what most people don't know. Taking just any magnesium supplement won't solve your problem because most supplements use the cheapest kinds that your body can't use or absorb. That's why I exclusively recommend Magnesium Breakthrough by Biooptimizer. It's the only full spectrum magnesium supplement with 7 unique forms of magnesium that your body can actually use and absorb. All Biooptimizer supplements are the best in class, guys. I've been working with and using their products for over 7 years now. For some reason you feel differently, you can get a full refund, no questions asked. They're so confident in this that they're going to offer a 365-day money back guarantee. Just go to biooptimizers.com/FrankRich. And in addition, we're going to give you a discount if you use code RICH10 for 10% off. Once again, guys, visit biooptimizers.com/FrankRich or click the link down there in the show notes and use code RICH10 to receive 10% off your order today.
Yeah, I mean, I think a few things are helpful. What women are really saying when they say, I want you to be vulnerable, is something along the lines of, I want you to know what you're experiencing, I want you to know what you're feeling. I want you to be able to communicate it to me. And then I want you to also be able to communicate that you either have a plan or you have support to figure it out. Because so many women have experienced being what I call a man's emotional processing center, right? And what can happen in a relationship is that a man will start to open up and he's like, oh, I'm actually going to start to talk about the problems that I'm dealing with, but he won't bring them to the men in his life. And so what he does is he brings them to the woman that he's with and he starts to open up, but there's no plan, there's no structure, he doesn't have a lot of other support. And so he starts to bring all of his emotional issues to her. And in turn, she does what's just natural to her, which is, well, let me help you solve this problem. And let me help you process these emotions, because that's what a lot of women are good at, right? They're good at talking about emotions and emotional situations. And that's when you listen to a lot of women's conversations, they're processing emotions. They're processing, how do you feel about that situation with your mom or with your husband or whatever? And so what can happen is this dynamic, which leads to the dreaded C word, which is codependency. It leads to codependency, where a man will become dependent on his female partner to help him process all of his emotions about tough situations. And it creates a mother-son dynamic. It actually creates this parental dynamic where it can erode the intimacy and the depth of connection within the relationship. And it creates that dependency where the man's like, I need you in order to help me process the shit that I'm going through. And the interesting thing is that in the beginning, both people can get tricked into feeling like this is a great situation, right? He's opening up. He feels so much better. He's like figuring things out in his life. And she's like, oh, he's opening up to me and that's awesome. And I feel safe and I love this. But slowly over time, it takes a turn where she's like, I'm tired about hearing about all your problems. How come you don't have other men that you're talking to, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? So know what you're feeling, be able to communicate what you're experiencing. Bonus points on there for being very clear and direct with your partner about what you want, right? Be able to tell your wife, your girlfriend, like, I don't need advice. I just want you to know where I'm at. And I also want you to know, third part is have a plan or have some support that is going to help you outside of the relationship, right? This is what creates high value in a lot of way, right? There's a lot of talk about high value man on the internet. And what gets lost is that your social network is also a huge piece of value that women look for. Women look for, are you resourced in the realm of a social network? Because most women know that men are lonely or isolated, or that they're disconnected, or that at the very least they don't have a very robust community of men that they're talking to about really meaningful shit. They might be talking about the latest UFC fight and what's happening in Formula One and that kind of stuff, but they're not talking about how they're doing after their fathers passed away, or the fact that like they can't get pregnant and they're having to go through IVF. If a guy doesn't have an outlet to go talk about those things, he keeps trying to bring them back into the relationship.
No, that's great. And yeah, I mean, it would be the lacking of those real male relationships that's going to lead to, well, this is the only outlet that I have. And, maybe he grew up with a dominating mother, and like that was how he always processed things, was she kind of took control over these things. We know that there's a big portion of men that are, under 30 and still living at home with their parents right now. This is great. And I guess a follow-up here would maybe be, because there's going to be a vast majority of guys that are maybe already in that particular dynamic at this point, right? They didn't hear this conversation prior to, falling into the trap where they've created this codependency. Now they're in a relationship because they've gone down the wrong path of being too vulnerable without having the solutions. So they have this relationship where the wife serves more as the dominating mother in the relationship. To a guy that's in that situation, like, what does he do to try to garner back some masculine strength in the relationship and flip the dynamics back to where he is, the lead authority in the relationship?
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple simple things that he can do tactically. I mean, number one is just the awareness of it, the recognition of it. That is very important. Starting to see the ways in which you as the man are creating the dependency in the relationship, and starting to just acknowledge that. Number two is prioritize getting a group of men that you can actually talk to immediately. Um, because otherwise it's your choice is suppression and repression, or offloading and outsourcing to your partner. So find a group of men, that's out there that you can bring some of your challenges to and say, look, I don't know what to do about this. And you need to find your own flavor or version of that, right? There's tons of communities out there of, like I have one called the Alliance, there's the Dad Edge, there's Order of Man, there's the Nation. I mean, there's tons of these groups that are out there for men that are doing their own work. And you have to find one that resonates with you, where you can lean in and have these uncomfortable conversations. So that's the second piece, because the quicker you can do that, the quicker that you have a different outlet to divert a lot of that processing, that psychological processing, that real life processing, right? It's like you have a team where you're like, okay, this shit's happening in my business. What do I do? This stuff's happening with my kids. How would you handle this? Like, has anybody gone through this before? And you can kind of ideate and mastermind around it. Or, maybe you're having a lot of grief, maybe your dad just died and you genuinely are devastated by it. And so you need a group of men that you can go to. So find a group of men. I think when it comes to the relationship, what can happen is that a lot of guys will pull back way too much, and they'll try and like unplug immediately. One of the things that you can start to really focus in on is, what are you saying yes to and what are you saying no to? Just a very, very simple strategy. When we've gotten into this codependent dynamic, there's a role that starts to emerge. And I did a long form podcast on what's called it's called A Man's Guide to Ending Codependency. And it's a really deep dive. It's about an hour long, where I go into every avenue of codependency for men. But what can happen is that this giver taker dynamic unfolds. And what happens is that a man, if he's in the giver role, which is often when codependency happens, a man is in the giver role, in the dynamic that we're talking about, where he's emotionally offloading onto his wife and outsourcing to her. He can ignore what he really wants to do. So he'll ignore his yeses and he will ignore his no's. And so he'll start saying yes to things that she wants to do that he doesn't actually want to be a part of. And he'll start ignoring some of the pieces of, like, I really want to go out with the guys on Friday night and, whatever, go watch UFC, whatever it is. And then, she's like, well, I was hoping that we'd have a date. And he's like, all right, okay, I'll just cancel it. Right. So you have to start to focus in on what's a no for you, what's a yes for you, and get back to the fundamentals, right? You have to just get back to the fundamentals. So I'd say start with those three things.